We have the Ministry of Investment, Innovation, and Social Development. Good morning.
Good morning. Are we coming across clearly now?
Yes, there's no duplication. That's wonderful.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Your
IT
IT staff came in there and got you all sorted out. Ms. Beulah says you're clear to me. KK having a good laugh. Ms. Dorothy is watching from Florida. She says it's perfectly clear in Florida. Hello, Miss Marva. Yeah, the background is not meant to be clear. That's why I use a specific lens, because the background is meant to be a little bit, it's called in the world of videography and this sort of thing, it's called the bouquet effect, where your background has a blurry effect to it. Some people pronounce that word differently, but Jonathan, stop smoking that marijuana and I wouldn't be blurry. I'm just saying. That's an inside joke. That's not an inside joke because everybody knows Jonathan is all about his weed. David says Facebook is fuzzy, but YouTube is clear. Alejandro says not clear, but unbothered. I can hear. All right, let's get this show on the road. Like I said, we got a lot to talk about this morning. We have some wonderful guests who have taken some time out of their busy schedule to join us. So first up, we have Mr. Matt Brown. Now, Matt is that's his brother. Oh my gosh. Freudian slip. I'm sorry. This is Charles Brown, acting. What is this now? You're the acting
Deputy Chief Officer.
Okay, acting DCO. Yes, acting Deputy Chief Officer for the Ministry of Investment, Innovation, and Social Development.
Correct.
And we also have Mr. Ian Tibbetts, who's the e-government director. So these gentlemen, as well as other members of their team, have been extremely busy with this national ID card. So let's talk about how long you have been working on this, because I've been hearing about it for a minute.
So, what do you want me to take that, Charles? So when I joined the civil service in December 2014, and it was identified as something that was, seen as something that was needed at that stage. However, there were a lot of prerequisites that had to be put in place, and so I would say we really didn't get to the point where we started working on the national ID till the 2018 timeframe. Then it was a matter of finances and when the government could afford it. So really, it's been in the works for a while. As you say, it's been on the cards. But as I said, there'll be no wine before it's time. It's one of those scenarios that there were a number of prerequisites. Obviously, starting with security, with I think data protection law needed to be enforced, etc. All of these things had to come into play before we were ready to really go on the national ID.
And I would add that I think it's 2015, 2014, 2015, that there was a cabinet paper that actually laid out the direction of how e-services would be done. And that was the initial digital strategy that said from then that we would be using the X-Road model. We had a delegation come down from Estonia to discuss how we would set it up. And a lot of the time between then and now was building and putting in place the infrastructure that would form the backbone for this. So this is now the layer that allows the legislation that allows the interconnected government, the joined up government that we've been building a lot of the infrastructure for.
But I think so I think one other thing that we really should highlight is, so the technology side, once we knew where we were going, technology side, I always tell people the technology piece is, in relative terms, the easy piece, because you can and you configure it right, you program it, it will do what you need it to do generally. The more challenging piece is really understanding how it needs to be applied and the legal side of it. So I think the truth is that the legal piece has taken us longer than the technology to get right. Make sure we understand what people want and what would be beneficial to our people, and then legislate for that. So that you and I started working on the legislation back in what, 2019?
2018, 19.
Yeah.
And the administration at the time, similar to this administration, is let's get it right. This is pivotal for our people. This is going to be a great leverager for the country.
Mm-hmm.
And we've really been pleased that it's been well supported the whole way through. And we are where we are because of that support.
And I mean, and during that time, we had changes of government, we had changes of ministry that was responsible. So there were a number of things, not making excuses, but there were a number of things that added to the time period beyond just the effort and going out there and making sure we got things right. But,
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to talk about, what this ID card is designed for. We're going to talk about the identification register and a few other things. But let's just address the people's concerns straight out of the barn, shall we? There are people who believe that this is some sort of, you talked about the legislative framework that was put in place initially that, really gave you the responsibility of starting to work on the whole ID card. What is the reasoning behind it? Is it the mark of the beast? Does government have some ulterior motive to control the people by way of an ID card? It feels like I'm in this alternative universe where, am I going to be microchipped? Are you going to secretly come into my house at night and put a chip into my brain or my spine or something else where you can, have a visual of my every thought? Does government have time for that? Y'all want to know what I'm thinking 24/7?
Not at all. Not at all. So really, the nugget here is the identification code, and that's where I think a lot of people get concerned because it's the element, and people get concerned about things that are new.
Yeah.
This is really about efficiency and giving the capability to have a unique identifier for yourself. This is a prime example. When I came in, you introduced me as my brother. I looked like my brother, right? I actually been told that I sound like my brother. We start conversations and we have to call each other later and say, okay, I said this to that person and you said this to that person, right?
Yeah.
This is the unique ID that clarifies that I am me. And it's the same as a person's name. It's just more unique than the person's name. So that's for the register piece, that you get an ID number that nothing special to it, is just unique and it persists with you. For the card, it's optional. And if you want to participate and take it up, feel free to do so. We of course encourage you to do so because of the efficiencies that will be leveraged on that. But other than that, the people don't have to actually participate at all with this program. Therefore, there's nothing here that is invasive in any way. I think that's roughly it in a box.
Yeah, and it interestingly, Sandra, when I first started, it was so that this concern about mark of the beast associated with this was something that I heard in the civil service. People saying, I think people are going to have this concern and so forth. So it's okay. So as we, it was then Councillor Saku, who was when we went around radio talk shows, and I went to the UCCI and ICCI and other places, and it was one of the things that I tried to figure out up front. Is this a concern that people have?
Yeah.
And I think the most memorable was I asked this at a session at ICCI. A Caymanian lady took me to school. she said, "Listen, don't get confused. This is if you understand the Bible and you study the Bible, completely different. This is not what don't." And she, like I said, it was really interesting. I mean, she was able to articulate it very well, and she was quite clear about her point. But to the thing that I think you said, it's really not. And not something that the government has ever identified to me as a motive. There's nothing that I've heard in any of my discussions that with ministers, the ministries, or anyone else that has any relationship to this whatsoever.
Yes. And I mean the benefits, and somebody said, I think it might have been Damien, says maybe it's too progressive, which I find interesting that, we live in a technologically advanced world where technology has made our lives so much easier. We've got online banking, we've got all these wonderful things that, to be quite frank, even during the COVID lockdown, there were some people who were struggling to get access to their bank account and struggling to get funds because they never bothered to sign up for online banking. And now they were stuck at home and going, oh, why can't I go stand in line for 2 hours to take out $25 at the bank? People just have, remote things, grocery shopping and having it delivered. Cayman does sort of, in my opinion, still living a little bit of a technological bubble. I mean, I know that we think we're super fast because we have the latest iPhones and most of us don't even know how to use all the features in our iPhones. But in the US, Amazon will deliver groceries to you. Yes. And they'll deliver clothes that you can try on and say, nope, I don't like it. It doesn't fit right, whatever, send it back. I mean, there's so many technological advances all over the world that we're not really the latest and the greatest at. I'm sure Ian is probably cringing at me saying this because he's in charge of e-government. So I know your remit is to try to get the Cayman Islands government there. But you talked about going to, was it Estonia? To see this card being worked. How long have the people in Estonia been using this sort of thing?
Since I think it was around 2000. It was either in the 90s or around 2000. That they
2000, Ian. What year are we in now? 2022.
Well, it's better than that actually. So Estonia didn't develop their own ID card from scratch. They actually adopted Finland's. So Finland's was prior to that. So
what a mess. So Damien, no, we're not being too progressive. We're trying to catch up with the times is the short answer to that one.
Yeah.
22 plus years behind. All right, let's talk about the logistics of what this national ID card is. We do have some questions that are coming in. So is it mandatory, first of all?
No, it's not mandatory. But I will say, as a lead on from a previous discussion, we are at a point where if government services are going to become more efficient, we have to take them online. And we have to build the processes where one government department can talk to another department efficiently to ask basic questions, to get information, to prevent you from having to run from department to department to move the paper around. And that's what we get criticized for day in, day out. Why do I have to go to get a police clearance from here to go give the police clearance to here? Why? This is your information. Why can't you just get it?
Exactly. I'm one of those people that complains about stuff like that because I see the inefficiency in it.
Sure. So this is the groundwork legislation that allows that type of transaction to happen. Why can't I go and get it? I was talking to a Caymanian just yesterday, and they were applying for one of DOE's licenses, and they're saying, why can't you all just go get the police clearance for me? But you're not able to be uniquely identified via DOE doing that. They put the onus on you and said, no, you do it because you have to prove yourself. You have to then bring the piece of paper once you've done it back to me. And that's where we need the ID code.
Yeah.
And then they could actually access that information uniquely and quickly.
And I think the other thing that people, we're one of the I think, so the Data Protection Act, it brings with it a quite a bit of work for us in the private sector, right? But it's for the right reasons.
Correct.
And it's about data minimization and so forth. And if you think about when you go to get a document, a birth certificate or something to take from one department to another to prove it, because you're dealing with a paper document, you're trying to fit everybody's needs. that document has a lot more information than the other department probably needs.
That's right.
If you think about what it has, which doctor delivered you,
What
in
their
some
parents'
cases,
name were, where they were born, where
it has lots of information that isn't necessarily required by the other entity, but they need a piece of information off of that sheet of paper. And if we can move to where we facilitate system to system interoperability and asking a very specific question, it could be, the question could simply be born in Cayman. Yeah. Or it could be date of birth.
Over 18.
Or it could also be derived information like that. So, instead of disclosing the actual date of birth, it could be disclosing that they're over 18 or they're within this
just
window.
Take that over 18 piece. If you're asking that question right now, if we do that, we take a photocopy of a person's driver's license. Under, they have your address, they have your height, they have your eye color, they have all this stuff they have just because you needed to prove that you were over 18. And it's because you ask that question, you need to deduce the answer. So you need to look at the date of birth and say, yes, she is. Right? That's a question though that should be asked. And it should be nearly just a yes or no answer. And that's the paradigm shift.
Yes, and we're going to talk about how how individuals can actually control who has access to their data, because I think this is a really important point, because I see based on some of the questions that are coming in that people are still missing the point a little bit. But we're going to go through these questions because that's why our guests are here, to make sure that you understand it. So the first question, KK says, once it's not mandatory, trust me, KK, once you see eventually how it will make your life so much easier, you'll want to get one. So no, they're not going to force it on you, because you know what? Government has recognized that forcing things on you, even when it's for your own good, will make you want to resist it even more. Remember what I told y'all about the lesson of the fist, right? The more you push someone, the more they're going to push back intuitively in the other direction, sometimes for no logical reason whatsoever. Just because you say it's mandatory, they're like, oh no, there's something going on here. We don't want that. So I think government has understood a little thing or two about human nature. So they're not going to make it mandatory, but every single thing is going to be built around this national ID card. So after a while, you're going to be in the minority for not having one, and your life is going to be difficult trying to get these things done, that you're going to be like, oh, I might as well get a national ID card. All right. Yes.
One thing that I think is also important that I think people should give consideration to. The national ID card, once they've gotten it, is in their possession. And if they choose to lock it in a safe and it never sees the light of day, it's in their control. They're protecting it. They do what they want with it. However, the day that they find themselves without an ID card for something else, they have it available to use. And I think that's, even if it's relegated in their mind to that concept, then it would be. But I also think that we need to give thought around the number of ID documents, and I believe we'll come on to this probably at some point, but the number of ID documents that are available to our people today. Really, it's government issues.
That was the next question that was coming up, Ian. You must be psychic. Be careful now.
So
you're gonna make rumors about you. So she said, this is what she says. She says, I have my ID card. It's the government election card, plus my passport, plus my birth papers, just saying.
Okay, so great. And one of the challenges that we realized with this is, for many of us, we don't have a deficiency as a normal, at most times with regards to IDs. We have a passport. But what we also know is that there are people in our society that don't have a passport, whether it's because they can't afford one, whether it is because they haven't had the support, they weren't themselves familiar enough or didn't feel comfortable with the process and didn't have someone to assist them, or that even for a short period of time while that passport is being issued or being renewed or has been docked, and right now, when we last talked to the passport office, I think the indication was that it was in the order of 10 weeks to get a passport from the, to get a passport back.
Mhm.
So you have those scenarios. But then and the good thing about the passport is it is available to all persons. However, well, that's probably an overstatement, but it's available to our local people. Because bear in mind, if a person is not someone that was born here or that is Caymanian,
Mhm.
most likely had to have a passport to get here in the first place.
Mhm.
There are a few exceptions to that, if you think about refugees and other scenarios, but otherwise they have to have had a passport to get here. So the passport is something that is relatively universally available, but it does have a cost. So some people also run the challenges there with just the cost of getting a passport. But then let's talk about the other ones that they mentioned. I think it was driver's license and voter ID.
Mhm.
Well, you have to be at least 18 to get your voter ID, I believe, right?
Mhm.
To be at least 17 to get a driver's license. You have to have the skill to pass a driving test to get your driver's license. You, if you're careless on the road, or you lose your driver's license, and then in that case you lose that identity mechanism, right?
Mhm.
For many of our seniors, after a certain point, whether it's vision deteriorates or otherwise, they're not able to maintain a driver's license, or their family may not feel that they're safe driving, etc. So there are various things.
Mhm.
Um, and and what we found was that there were our youth, or elderly, and those that had other challenges were some of the most at risk of not having a government issued photo ID document.
Mhm.
If I just try to quantify the potential scale of this problem, and it doesn't apply to everybody, so I'm really giving you the potential scale. Looking at the census information from 2021,
Mhm.
the number of persons from under 19, and the number of persons 19 and under, 17 and over, made up over a third of the Caymanian population.
Mhm.
And the other trend I think that we should mention here is that, and I probably because of my age, but I struggle to understand this one from just because of how we grew up. But young people are not they are not necessarily interested in getting their driver's license now at 17. I remember I was pretty much waiting for the door to open when I turned 17.
Mhm.
So it's quite common that they may not get a driver's license for a couple of years. And I think if we're realistic with ourselves, with where technology is going,
Right.
likelihood of people needing a driver's license in the next couple of years is diminishing. So sorry, let me stop there.
So really
So,
quickly,
yes.
that we conducted a number of focus groups, and a lot of these same issues came out, that the vulnerable in the gap are the elderly, and
Mhm.
on the young side, it's in particular to inter-island travel. We've heard of the horror stories of persons having to get a child's image notarized as a true likeness of the individual, just so that they can travel between the islands. And this is so they can have a valid ID document to go through the airport, because we have international airports both in the BRAC and in Grand Cayman. So by stripping away the other functions away from an ID, this is just an ID as an ID. It's not a passport that's a travel document. It's not a driver's license that's a driving document. It's not an election card that's an election card document.
Oops.
It's really just, and that allows to issue an ID to the vulnerable in the gap. So it's available to any age
Mhm.
or young. And well, we haven't gotten onto the digital signing pieces yet, but there are pieces there that we think are huge leverages for even a teenager that's becoming of age.
All right. Got lots of questions about how this is going to work. We'll get to your questions. Just give us a second here, folks. So the legislation, let's speak specific to the legislation, right? So we've just had two bills
Mhm.
that have been gazetted. We've got the identification register bill and the Cayman Islands identification card bill. So let's talk about what the register is first and foremost. So what is this identification register?
Did you by chance have any of the slides that we sent, or should we?
Yes, she did send them to me. Let me just see if I can open them up. Hold on one second. It would have been in PDF. Give me 1 second here. Open my computer. Yes. All right. So, but in layman's terms, right, when we're talking about what this identification register is, let's see here. I think this is the 8-page document. So let's just pull this into another window on this side. All right, very good. Okay, so let me see if I can get this. Okay, so this is the identification. I think, is this the one that you're referring to?
No, it
No.
was one that was sent just this morning.
Oh,
And, yeah, but that's it there. In terms of the register, that answers the question.
okay. Let me just have a look. This morning, yes, at 8:09. Oh, okay. Let's open this. Yeah, I don't tend to check emails believe it or not, in the morning. Yeah, because I'm already trying to go live at that time. Well, I'm already live at 8 o'clock, but here we go. All right. So, yes, this will break it down a bit. So identification register, right? So there's those two companion pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So walk us through this now. The identification register is going to be data held on the register. So this is essentially a computer somewhere that will hold this information.
And the bills establish the office of the registrar, and the registrar has a responsibility to maintain this information for the public and do so in a confidential manner. It lays out what those confidential areas are and what the violations to those areas are, and there's stiff fines if there was any particular violation of the registrar or any of their staff. So this is
the registrar is the existing registrar that we have?
No, it's essentially the registrar that would be the custodian of the data that you see in front of you here.
Okay, so that will be a new government department.
That it'll be handled under the PSML as a new appointment.
Okay.
In the Public Service Management Act as a new appointment, just like as a civil servant. So the key takeaway is that this information is information that you, as every single one of us has. We have this information in multiple departments right now. This is what's on your IDs in many cases. On the left, the identity facts is the basic core set of data that has to be with a person on their entry in the register. And then the related facts are the optional items that relate to identification and useful elements. And a lot of that side is populated by the person. So for instance, their residential address, principal contact information, that's email, that is telephone number, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really government giving control back to the citizens to say, this is your ID. One of the key themes that came out of our focus groups was a concept of I am me. This is your ID with government. And if we connected to this is a digital portal that will allow you to log in and see your information now with government and interact with it, update it. So we're giving you a very efficient way to keep your telephone number, your address information up to date. And the more connected that government becomes, the less places you have to keep repeating that same basic set of data. When you go to fill out a form, they can query this information from this from the register, and it is recorded. So you talked about transparency and logging.
Mm-hmm.
Every time your data is requested from this database, it is logged, and you will be able to log into your own data and say,
Mm-hmm.
see, oh, police access my data, or
Mm-hmm.
they'll access my data, or
Land
DOE,
registry.
land register, wherever you've been doing business with government, it will be logged that they have accessed your data in the register. And that's a transparency element that allows you to say now, oh, well, I recall going to the HSA, for instance, and yes, that
Mm-hmm.
was it. Or you could say, well, I don't really understand that. Let's go query as to why
Mm-hmm.
that was.
And I think
Right.
something
Mm-hmm.
that I believe will kind of put just one example of a benefit in perspective for many persons that especially that own property here. So think of the future state where when you have bought a piece of property or piece of property is in your name, you have added in the with lands the registrar of
Department of
lands
yeah.
that your ID code to that entry. Remember, I said you added with them, so it's not telling the register or the registrar that you have done this, but you added it there. And subsequently, there's a development that needs to notify adjacent landowners of um, some plan change, etc. Now, today they use information that in many cases is really old. You know,
So
that information we put our address or contact our mailing address generally I think in there at the time that we register the piece of property. Yes, there is a mechanism I believe that you can update your address, but
I think it's $50.
but yeah, and how often realistically how often do we actually do it?
Mm-hmm.
And then so when they go to notify you, they're meeting the legal requirement, and I think reasonably, by notifying you to the address that they have for you, but that address is probably 10 addresses ago. And whereas if you had your identification code in their record, they could then use that um, to get your address, your current address that you have updated
Mm-hmm.
from related facts here, that and then be able to send that communication to your proper address. Now, that's just one example, and the fact that they got your address doesn't mean that they had to get anything else. It could just be that they got the query could be to provide your address only and not anything.
if I in a previous life, I used to work with the Department of Planning,
Mm-hmm.
and I recall vividly the hesitation, the anger, the frustration of individuals saying, "Why are you notifying me via registered mail?" And the registered mail is the legal requirement under the current law.
Mm-hmm.
You have people that live overseas.
Mm-hmm.
They have really no means of accessing the notification, no means of accessing the plans, very limited in that regard. If this paradigm does change government services the way that we hope it will, in the future, that law could be amended to allow you to maintain your email address, let's say here, and you get that notice sent to your email address rather than registered mail. Or
Mm-hmm.
have it via registered mail, then
Mm-hmm.
you could do so. So,
Yeah.
it gives that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing
Well, I tell you what, we have a ton of questions, but I do want us to kind of move through sort of an initial presentation, because I think a lot of your questions might be answered. And then we'll do a quick fire component for our guests. But someone else mentioned that Hong Kong has had an ID program for 45 years. So when we think that we're being so incredibly progressive and we're ahead of the times, this
Sure.
person's like, please ask them to go talk about the national ID program in Hong Kong. Now, Just having a quick look at Hong Kong, they have a population of 7.5 million. And in less than 4 years, they were able to roll out in 2003. Maybe they rolled out a new one, but they were able to roll out a new ID program, a new ID card that phased out all of its predecessors. And it was held by over 7 million citizens and foreign residents. So they were able to do that very, very quickly. So with a population size of Cayman, I think that we could really get on it. So again, digital government, really trying to provide better services to the people, even in Hong Kong. They were talking about the card features. It has a microprocessor. It's capable, again, of storing personal data, a digital photograph, and 2 fingerprint scans. So they're way ahead of the game. I'm pretty sure I've not heard anything about fingerprint scans being on our ID cards, right?
No, so you'll notice that there's no fingerprints, there's no disability in the information that is being displayed here. And that's because, for instance, as it relates to disability, there could be another register that keeps that type of information up to date. That's really tied to the medical field, that's tied to the person's health record. But the ID that's issued in this register really should persist in any of these other registers so that you can keep your information up to date and be identified as you.
Well, Alejandro says it should be. Carol says Germany, Singapore, most of Europe has an ID card. So folks, if you're listening to the program, I personally need y'all to get with the 21st century. We live in 2022. And so I know Caymanians can be a little bit afraid of things, but I'm here to tell you that you need to embrace this because it will change your life once government is ready. Because we're gonna talk about government being ready here in a second and put both Ian and Charles under the fire a little bit. So this is what it's gonna look like. Now I saw one, I think it was last year. I actually saw an MP with one of these prototypes that I think you guys already had kind of started testing. So you've had prototypes out there and you've been going through the rigorous testing. Ian, you did a demo last week for us during the media meeting where you kind of showed how you can just like a credit card, you can hold it up to your phone and transfer data from the phone to the ID card. Tell us a little bit about how that will work in real terms. What kind of data are we talking about and what are we transferring?
Okay, so thanks for that. So I think let's start by taking a look at on screen what information is actually on the card. Name, date of birth, immigration status, nationality, sex, ID code, a photo, and a signature. That same information is available in the chip on the back on the card. And the chip, the card is both contact and contactless, like your new debit and credit cards typically. But like your passport, the contactless capability of the card to read that information that's on the front requires you to first optically read the MRZ. This is a protection to ensure that when you're going through say airports, etc., or busy places, that somebody just isn't sitting there with a high-powered NFC scanner and trying to read all this data. They need to first optically read the MRZ, machine readable zone on the back of the card. It's that code you see, that you see in your passport type scenario, and then that's effectively the key to being able to read the information that's on the front of the card without sticking it into a reader. So it's really a mechanism to ensure that you have to have the possession of the card effectively to be able to get the data electronically. Then the other capability is you stick the card into a reader and you could read that same information. Now, so then people will say, but then getting this data. Well, the reality is, if you gave any of your other IDs to someone, they would have the information as well. If you take a photocopy of it, if it's physical, you still have the information. It's a matter of whether you're reading it digitally or not. And if you think about what are some of the efficiencies that have come along with immigration and airports? It is that capability that instead of you sitting at the immigration officer's terminal and then keying in every piece of data from your passport, they simply scan it, read it, and you're able to move on. It's why credit cards and debit cards are tap or insert into a reader now instead of them having to key in the data. So it's the same concept there for efficiency. And the idea of that is that both in government or private sector, they can provide facilities where your card, the data from your card can be inputted into their system without having to key it in by reading that information, either optically from the MRZ, which would, the only thing that the machine readable zone in the back wouldn't convey is the photo and the signature. Photo and the signature, right? But so if they needed those, they could do it. And that eliminates or gets rid of the errors in, somebody mistyping the IE code, for example. There are functionalities in the chip. There is a certificate. I don't want to get technical here, but it uses public key infrastructure. Sorry, and there's two PKI certificates in there. One is for authentication, so that instead of, for example, today when you go to log into customs online, you enter a username, password, get the one-time code, and so forth. You could also, what we're working towards is you'd be able to stick your card into a reader and enter the PIN, and that's your authentication mechanism. The second piece, which is it uses the same basic technology, but it's for a specific purpose, which is electronic or digital signature. And almost all of us today have used, pretty much, let's put it this way, I think anyone that would be watching your show online has probably used, a digital or electronic signature in some form, whether it's a photo, image, like a photo almost of your wedding signature, or it is some, again, based on public key infrastructure technology, where there's a certificate installed on the computer and you're using a function on the computer to just do a signature, or in some cases, the top-notch security of having a device like the card that the signature is applied within, and that way it can only ever have been applied by the person in possession of that device and knowing the PIN code for that. And I'll just kind of finalize by saying that this meets the maximum requirements of the electronics transactions law here, which basically speaks to what it takes to be reliable. And the document has to, the signature could only have been applied by the specific person. The fact that the signature is valid can be verified, and the document to which it, or the digital document to which it has been applied, the integrity of that can be verified. So it does that, as well as it aligns to what is defined as a qualified digital signature within the European regulations. And we had a choice. Give me 2 seconds on this, but we had a choice to try to set up our own certificate authority to do this. And I, for one, have been someone that's advocated against that, because I don't think it is something we're ready to do. I think we're undertaking to do it right, or we would create more of a risk by doing it and not doing it right. And there's another huge drawback. The most common thing that I think that gets where the digital signature get consumed is within like Adobe Acrobat, when persons receive a PDF document that's been signed. And to get companies like Adobe or Microsoft to recognize this, so that somebody didn't have to first install a certificate or trust our certificate, etc., we would have to have had a minimum of 100,000 signatures in circulation for them to start a discussion with us. So we chose to use a certificate authority that is on the EU trust list and has to meet all of the standards for the qualified digital signature under the EU. It also meant that immediately our digital signature is recognized anywhere a European Union digital signature is recognized. So I'll stop there.
All right. So I mean, it's a little bit technical, folks, but what they're essentially saying, because Mark claims that he's falling asleep. So let me break it down. So Mark, you can pay attention, because we're old school and new school at the same time. So I don't have a ruler that I'm going to beat you on your knuckles with if you fall asleep in class, but I need you to understand how important this information is. Because one of the reasons why you're able to fall for all the propaganda that's out there about things, even as simple as a national ID, is if you don't understand the technology behind it, you don't understand the security protocols and steps that have been taken to ensure that this is as safe as any other ID really anywhere in the world. And so Ian said a lot from a technical perspective, but all he's telling you in all of that is to say that we made the decision, e-government and whoever else made the decision to not develop that aspect of it, not have that database management here in this jurisdiction, because number one, it's probably too much work. Number two, the requirements of having at least 100,000 signatures. We don't even have a population that size yet. It was the cost benefit analysis in the real world made no sense when there are trusted systems out there already. That big organizations such as Adobe, if you've ever electronically signed a document, trust me, every time I log in to sign my documents electronically, I need to put in my password, and you've got all sorts of encryption and stuff that happens on the back end that I don't have to think about as the end user. I just do it and we're good to go. And people who receive that document can trust that that actually came from Sandra T. Hill, me specifically, and nobody else. Yeah.
That's right. You got it.
That's how I would have said it if I had been able to say it as eloquently.
So let me just also say this about the ID, because this is one thing that you brought up that I think is really important for people to understand. So the amount of protection that is in this document, we see the chip and the barcode, all the ID, all this fancy stuff, just as safe as your passport, same technology.
And if someone wants to try it, because your passport has a chip, it has that MRZ that you're seeing on the screen now type scenario, and there's software out there today. A free one that I've used, and I'm not making a plug for them, it's free, is a software called Regula, REGULA, that will read your passport, it will allow you to read the MRZ and then read the chip as a result, and you can even do things like facial matching with it, and this is on for your phone. If you take that same piece of software, you can do the same thing with the ID card. So that just shows you that it is standards based. It is aligned, the standards that are used for the passport. It's not suggesting that it is an international travel document for a second, but it's using the same technology. All
right. So one of the logical reasons, sorry, I keep wanting to call you Matt, but sorry, Charles, just give me 1 second. One of the logical reasons that has already been set forward in terms of identity confusion is the actual name. And believe it or not, I see it happening all the time in the judiciary, where people with a similar name or the same name are being summoned to court, and police records get confused, court records get confused, because, we got so many Ebankses and Powells and Mandersons, and, someone's a junior versus a senior. And sometimes the police get it wrong, and they'll show up to the door and arrest the wrong person, or serve a warrant on the wrong person, or the judge is saying, where's this individual? And it turns out that's not the person that you actually need or want before you. So this card will give every single person a unique identification, that once you have that issued, there will be no confusion once you present that about who you are. I like this. one about too much paper. So the wastage of paper that has to be, stored in a warehouse, which, listen, you guys have no clue how many trees we're killing and how much paper gets stacked in a warehouse for 25 years to meet some requirement of holding on to that paper forever. We're supposed to be moving into a paperless world. And it's really crazy how much money and resources we, the people, private organizations, public organizations, still spend shuffling paper around. It's just we create paper and then we have to do something with that paper in terms of storage, facilities, shuffling it and archiving it and all sorts of things. I remember, just as a side note, back in the day, this was, oh gosh, this would have been late 90s. I was at Maples and Calder, and they decided to try to start their journey towards going a little bit, the paperless direction. And so my summer task as a law school student was to go into the warehouses and to destroy physical files that had been sitting there for 25 years. So I hired a crew of men, had to get this enormous industrial shredder because it had to be a very controlled environment. They didn't want third parties kind of shredding their documents. And every single file had to be examined for certain important documents that could not be destroyed. So if that file had a will in it, if it had a deed of trust, there's certain documents. So I actually had to go through files and look for these documents. And oh my God, it was the most interesting experience ever. I was I was covered in dust from head to toe every single day, 12 hours a day for this summer project. And it was just unbelievable. And I was sitting there going, my God, these documents have been sitting in this warehouse all this time. Every email, they'd print it off and put it on a file, and they didn't know what to do with it. So this whole concept of people really getting with the times and trying to at least decrease the amount of paper that we're creating and we're having to store and do something with, I think is actually fantastic. Now, this one about ID overload is a real concern. We saw Miss Morna already said this morning, well, how many IDs does she need? She's got a passport. She's got this, she's got that. So tell us how having one centralized ID that is connected to all of these different agencies and services will help us to potentially eliminate a lot of these other IDs that we're walking around with.
So it has the potential to do so.
Yes.
When you can reliably quantify that I am me, even digitally, without me being in front of you, because all of these are based on an in-person verification. Here I am. Here's my passport. Here's my ID. I am, and you make a cross link that the person in front of me has a likeness of the printed document. The leverage here of being able to do so digitally, that's why that certificate, that authentication certificate that's digitally on the card, can prove that you are you digitally, because only you know your PIN, right? So you have a government issued document, you have a card reader, and you know your secure PIN. You now can reliably identify digitally without being in front of the person, and that's a huge game changer. We can't speak for any of the other authorities as to what could be eliminated at this point, but we can say that it has the potential to be game changing and allow guidance to be rewritten.
And I think two things I'll chip in there quickly. One, there are many cases that you need at least two identity documents. And an interesting concept is that what's required for identity is actually defined by the party that is receiving it or relying on it, more so than say the government, etc. Because an entity that is doing something that, let's just look in the financial services side. They have obligations to ensure that they're dealing with the right person, that they know the customer has, is not doing something malicious, etc. They have to ensure that they put in place processes and require enough to do their job adequately. The protection law on the other side comes back and says, don't do it excessively. But it's really that relying party that has to determine whether this is good enough. And in many cases, they require 2 forms of ID.
Mm-hmm.
This comes back to why you need at least one plus this. The passport, the other thing that I think we didn't really mention is it's not really designed for everyday carry. Whereas I think the ID card, one of the things that was identified is it needed to be convenient to carry. Is it going to be, obviously if you're going to the beach and all you've got on is a pair of Speedos, well, it may not be the most convenient thing to carry, but it's still a whole lot more convenient to carry than a passport.
Yeah.
And so I think that's
and the concerns of it being stolen are much less.
Yeah. Because I'm always surprised, here people lose everything as far as I'm concerned. I'm surprised they're not losing more spouses, but normally IDs are at the top of the list, and passports. And I'm always like, why are you walking around with your passport? I only take my passport out when I'm going to travel. People lose passports all the time, and then they become frantic because it can take months to get a passport replaced, and it costs money. And if you're outside the country, it's not easy to get a stolen passport or lost passport replaced, but people tend to carry it, especially foreign nationals. They don't drive. They don't have a driver's license. They don't have a voter's ID card because they don't vote in this jurisdiction. And so the only real ID that they have here is that passport, and they walk around with it as though it's a national ID. And it's a lot of risk on their part. Trust me, I get people all the time. They're like, oh my God, I lost my bag. Please tell them to take everything but my passport and my documents. I need those items back. It's just unbelievable. But I'm glad that this has pointed out some of the sort of downside of these other types of IDs. Driver's license, for example, you have to be of a particular age to be able to get it. And you do have to actually pass, although we're questioning the skill and knowledge requirements, but nonetheless, some is required. So there you have it. And then you have the voter's ID card, which actually does not expire at all. Now, I was expecting to hear from this gentleman before he says a word. Let's do a little, folks. Let's do a little prize. Who do you think, gift certificate up for grabs? Who do you think I was expecting to hear from this morning and is actually on the phone? Let's do it because he's not. Don't be making any sounds so people guess who you are, sir. So you already know it's a male. I gave it away. Who do you think is actually on the phone this morning? Jonathan, you just won yourself. Oh, I think Damien came in first. I'll give you both a certificate. Jonathan and Damien said Denny. Leanne was close with a third. And of course, Jackie was like, yes, honey child, that has to be Denny. Denny, good morning.
Buenos dias.
How are you?
Not bad. You didn't play your little jingle or whatever it was that you promised you'd play when I say that.
Hold on. Quick second here. Our regular listeners to the program will know by now.
We really saturate the soil twice a day. That's why my tomatoes haven't been coming in.
Hola. Me llamo es Brian. Let's see. Nosotros queremos ir con ustedes.
That was pretty good. But actually, when you said me llamo es Brian, you don't need the ace. Just me llamo Brian.
Oh, you speak English?
No, just that first speech and this one explaining it.
You're kidding, right?
¿Qué?
K? What? All right, Denny, what's on your mind today?
Morning, Denny.
Speaking of confusion. Well, I have a question regarding the identity register bill, the definition identity facts. Paragraph E of that definition says first name, middle name, surname. Where do you put the suffix?
The suffix being if you are a junior,
Danny wearing junior.
Senior, the 3rd, the
Well,
20th.
well, technically, you don't say senior because you would just be, for example, my father's name is Denny Erlin Warren. My name is Denny Erlin Warren Jr.
Oh.
And for the benefit of the public, I had an incident when I went to renew my first driver's license. I went, they fixed it all up, and they came out and they handed it to me, and I says, well, you don't have junior on my driver's license. Oh, they said, oh, that's because we don't have a policy. We have a policy of not using junior on documents. And I said, well, the problem I have with that is that my father's name is Danny Erling Warren, and my name is Danny Erling Warren Jr. So if you remove junior, you're putting my father's name on the document and not my name. So I had to write the commissioner of police to have my proper name reflected on my driver's license. So the question is, in this, I see first name, middle name, surname. Where would you put the suffix?
So a quick question for you, Denny. What does your passport say? Does it include it?
Denny Erlin Warren Jr.
It does include it.
And does it include it just as part of the last name, or is it actually recognized as a suffix?
I can't remember that.
I think
that might be a critical question.
I could look it up though.
Yeah, have a look.
It's not hard to do.
All right.
It is part of the last name.
So it's not a separate name.
I think the complication is that a lot of IDs don't recognize suffix, but it's definitely something that we would be willing to take back and discuss further. Yeah.
If I recall, I looked at this before, but I obviously I'm trying to pull this back up my head, and I'm pretty sure that's where the issue came in, is that it is only if it's included in the last name. Otherwise, it's not normally in many of these documents. But it's definitely one we can, as John said, we can go back and have a look at.
All right, Denny, leave us there because we got a million questions that we need to get through.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Damien and Jonathan, don't forget I got some gift certificates for you. All right, let's go ahead and get to our user questions. Yes, let's just do that because it's a lot of questions. So, gentlemen, the idea here is to answer these questions as quickly and succinctly as possible. That's your task. In other words, no long, protracted answers if you can help it. Number one. Oh, that was, let me see. Let me get to the right question. Okay. Purpose. I think this has already been answered. Captain Mark. He says, what's the purpose of the national ID when they give away PR like Johnny Cakes? That's probably not a question for you, really, but we've talked about how it will help streamline the process on many different fronts, even in terms of like the digital signature being verifiable. You can have access to different e-government services, and you again will be the controller of all of this information, whether it, immigration wants you to verify, wants to access something, driver's licensing department, lands and surveying. So the idea is eventually for all of these government agencies, if you provide them with information sort of linked to the national ID, that you can streamline your life quite a bit. Cameron is saying, hope that it doesn't take as long as them licenses. So this is a logistical question and it's worth it. Say now that you come on CMR, you're here, everybody thinks, oh, actually, this is a wonderful idea. I want my ID card, and you have a run on the ID cards. When is it rolling out is the first question.
Okay, so in terms of rolling out, the anticipation is that it will be 1st of July, basically, because obviously now legislation passes, then we have to go back and make sure that everything, we've set up the basic solutions, but we have to make sure that they're configured to comply completely with the legislation. Secondly, we have to we've done a lot of preparation around issuance and so forth, but we still have to get locations in place because we didn't want to go rent a place or set up offices, in the for issuance, etc. However, in terms of the next part of the question around the process, we have both in-person and online enrollment. Enrollment being, for persons that have access to technology, they can go through the process with their passport and complete the enrollment online. Someone then will verify that in person, and then produce the card, and it's basically for them, it's collection of the card, right?
We just want to highlight that point. So even though you're doing online enrollment, there's still a eyeball check to make sure that the person is still the person. So that's an efficiency element that we're allowing that venue, but it's still going to be verified.
Yeah, the technology is such today that with deepfake technology, you some of these things you can prevent a lot, but you do have to bring it back to a human in that case. Right. The other scenario is that we anticipate to have teams that would be issuing it here in Cayman and in Cayman Brac, and we would have also have mobile capability that we can go to a location, for persons that are shut possibly, etc. If similar to how you do mobile voting, we can accommodate that. Also, we could go to large employers, etc., and do it.
Wow. So you're gonna have a whole team set up to do, especially this initial registration drive. So you guys are going to be extremely busy, to say the least. Knowing that we are likely to have continued supply chain issues down the line, I'm sure that you've already thought about what that means for your rollout come summer, how many cards you need, and so on and so forth. They're being produced locally, like once someone does the registration, and are they going to get their card within what space of time?
We have the intention is in terms of setting up teams, the intention is to partner with people that have experience with doing this already. So we'd like to partner with persons like, say, the elections office that also do enrollment, so that they have the systems and processes in place, mechanisms and processes in place for doing this. In terms of the supply chain, we have already have an inventory of cards ready for the first batch, basically, and we have a contract with supply, and that our vendor, appreciating the fact that of those supply chains, has to be very proactive in making sure that we have supplies. I think,
but it will take some time to get cards to everybody in the population. So rollout will probably be in the tune of quite a few months to maybe a year to get everybody access to a card. But because we're doing the two streams of having online enrollment and we can physically enroll you in person, we can have the efficiencies of the online drives to do batch processing.
And the other thing to say is, obviously, with the card being voluntary, we have to make assumptions around how much volume we will have, to take up initially, etc. But it is a case of with distribution like this, it's a matter of what can we afford, or what's the demand, and therefore, and what can we afford. Because it is possible to hire teams to really set up and do a rapid drive. It's a matter of what the demand is.
Okay.
We're flexible.
Yes, Damon says, so after permit is approved, the national ID card is issued. What about background checks? So for foreign nationals who are coming into the jurisdiction, once you do, the initial launch of the IDs, will they be eligible for an ID right away? Or is there some kind of requirement that you be an island for a specific amount of time and then you get an ID? How will that part of it work? So work permit holders obtaining an ID.
So the background check would be work's responsibility prior to the issuance of the actual work permit. Once you are legally an ordinary resident or have the ability to be a resident here, the bill as envisioned would allow you to be issued a national ID, and it would state your immigration status as it relates to your work permit.
And this is good because this should now eliminate, we have some Caymanians who've been referred to as Nowarians, depending on when they were born. They're Caymanians, but they have to go and get this acknowledgement letter, which takes an exorbitant amount of time. The idea now is if you have this ID, that will eliminate that confusion as well.
So we have thousands of Caymanians that have already been acknowledged that right away they can get this sorted out and get that immigration status as Caymanian on the card. Because of this process and because of the efficiency of this process, we definitely have the potential to change that acknowledgement structure and how that is processed. And we will continue those talks with work as to how that can be leveraged.
But the key is that after you've gotten the card, you now have a solution in terms of proving your immigration status at any given time.
And that has never been done. We've never had an ID before that says I am Caymanian and I don't have to take around my grandfather's birth certificate and I verify, right? That all goes away now that you have the card.
But for clarity, the immigration status is still owned by work. So one thing that will probably be helpful to elaborate for persons is where in the case of someone that's on a work permit, the card will probably say CQR code or scan QR code for their immigration status, so that you're reading real time the current information on their immigration status, because that may have changed. They may have had a work permit when they got the card, and they may now not, or they may. So
we didn't really get to talk about the QR code piece, but on the back of the card is a QR code, and the individual has the ability to turn on fields and turn off fields there. That's another way of sharing. And the immigration status, for instance, or any of the information on the QR code is the most recent information. So you notice that the address was not printed on the card. That is a QR code accessible field because that changes so often. And if you wanted to share it, you could turn it on as a shareable field.
Yeah, but it's
and somehow I'm not sure what happened to our guests. They disappeared. Let's give them a minute to just jump back on. But this is while they're doing that, let me just show you. So this is a QR code to the right hand side of the card that's being referred to. So I don't think I kicked them out, but if I did, my apologies. Jump back on. So is anybody listening that can get them back on? Meanwhile, Denny's going to keep us company. Denny?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was listening to the discussion about listing your Caymanian status on immigration status on the card.
Yeah.
Is that one would have to prove one would have to prove that they are Caymanian before it could be listed on the card as being Cayman.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there has to be a verification process, and the people issuing the card.
Just meaning, because what you said was that it'll do away with that process, but it won't.
No, it won't. Well, yes, you're right. So let's clarify that. So the idea, again, I think Charles mentioned it, is that hopefully there can be a streamlining of how that is done. But what I'm saying, say for example, you're a child, right? And you get this ID card as a child. When you turn 18, you don't then have to go through this, all of a sudden, because of a certain age requirement, I have to go and complete my verification for work purposes or whatever. That theoretically, if WRC does their job, should be something that can be already in the system and linked to the card. Does that make any sense?
Yes, but before you get to the point where people are having children post the implementation of an ID card, you would then have to prove your immigration, your whether or not you're Caymanian before it could be recognized as such on the card.
Yes, well, there still has to be a process to work.
Yeah, but I guess if we kind of jump in, so what we don't want to do is print something that isn't verifiable or hasn't, isn't accurate. So yes, there does have to be some, and the authority for immigration status is work. So they do have to have it identified that this person is definitively such an immigration status. We are in discussions with them around how that, and I think they're considering what possibilities there are to more efficiently.
But Sandra, you also made a very good point that when a child is born, we can do this process a lot simpler. So I'll just paint what a mature environment could look. Child born day one, registered, workflow sent to work from that day, that the register already knows who the parents are because it has the parent's ID code is already known. If one of the parents or the relevant parent under the Immigration Transitions Act is Caymanian, that process could already be made more efficient, and you could know what that child's Caymanian status is within 2 days, 3 days, a week, a month of that child being born. That's what a mature environment doing it this way could look like.
Yes. All right. Okay, Denny, that's your second question today. Right. That's it.
All right.
All right. So we have a lot of questions around who actually can get one. So Lennon Christian says it must be issued to permit holders, especially, and not mandatory for locals, as the guest says. So does a permit holder have to get one of these cards?
So I'll just reiterate that the register, everybody that is legally an ordinary resident will be in the register. Has a right to reside here will be in the register. The card is optional for uptake, but yes, all of this information would be in the register for everybody that is residing or has a right to reside here. And I also noticed that there was a previous question about, is it like social security numbers? And that is obviously, because of proximity, our go-to analogy. It is different in the sense that the ID code number is not supposed to be a secret. So you have this paradox with social security numbers. It's supposed to be a secret that you share.
And that's why I stopped sharing the last couple of digits of mine.
Could be nearly stolen because of that.
Yes.
We do not have that issue because this is a shareable field. There is a component of this regarding to your PIN that you have with the card, that when you are interacting with any member of the public, that is a piece that you know and only you know. It is owned by you. And therefore you can authenticate as you. And that's why the number itself is not crucial, that it be this kind of semi-secret that is shared and not shared.
Right. All right. Alejandro says, I swear all these years my voter's ID was all I ever needed. Well, consider yourself lucky. I don't even know half the time where my voter's ID card is. Damien, just clarifying a previous comment that he made. He said what he was meant is that combining all IDs is too proactive and forward thinking, because Mr. Ezard Miller brought up this idea from 20 years ago. So yes, fingerprinting element. So there's a few people who've actually said that they believe the fingerprinting element, including Natasha, should be on it, or it would be extremely helpful. Now, it's not going to be on it. Do you envision that it could be added at a later date? Like, what sort of expansion capabilities does this system have?
So we're envisioning that it's not going to be on it. We had focus groups where these debates were again highlighted. So we appreciate that there is sentiments within the public that feel, listen, I have nothing to hide. You should have fingerprints on it. And we recognize that. But there's also similar sentiments that fingerprinting, DNA, optical scans, that's a stretch too far. And yes, you could.
The biometrics element you're not going to do.
Right. This is a basic photo ID with a few other elements that allow us to verifiably know that you are you just through the digital capabilities. And that's where we've drawn the line.
All right. Now, folks, I know you're listening to the program intently. Telephone number, if you have any questions, is 936-BOBO. That's 936-2626. We're going to go into overtime because I know a lot of y'all are hanging on here for the Miss Cayman updates. Don't go anywhere. Chuck has cleared us for some overtime. So we want to get as many of your questions in relation to the national ID answered. So cohesiveness, says Cameron, between government departments was something we've been complaining about since Jesus made wine. Well, Cameron, it's getting a little bit closer now. Janetta says, do we have to pay for it?
The intention is that the card is free at least one every 5 years, because the lifespan of the card, which again is a combination of things that we've chosen a 5-year card. It's our first issuance of the card. The technology, there's a step change in cost to move from a card that has a lifespan of 5 years to one that goes beyond. And
Mm-mm.
5 years gives a more realistic time for persons' appearances to remain intact. And that it's one of the things that with the voter ID, for example, persons concerned that, well, if the circumstances have changed, but there's no expiry date, someone could still have the voter ID. If because of the 5-year lifespan, then you know that if their circumstances would have been revalidated after 5 years.
From a government perspective, we're really just trying to get access to the cards as much as possible. We're trying to get these cards out into the public. The only areas where payment will come into play is to prevent abuse. And that's really the purview.
All right. So when it comes to, yes, when it comes to the cost, we do have someone who has a couple comments. Actually, he has quite a bit. He says, I don't understand. A national identification system has the potential to be a very useful tool in many aspects. It can be useful in the identification of persons during an investigation by law enforcement. It can be used as an identification when a valid ID is needed. It can be used to register for many services that government provides. With all of these positives, why not make it mandatory? Why leave it up to the individual to decide if they want to do it or not? Why not make it a useful tool?
So, like fingerprints, the mandatory versus optional was a very polarized perspective in those focus groups, and I think it's something. My only fear with making it voluntary is the people that most need it mightn't get it, mightn't pursue it soon enough. But otherwise, I think, and it's really that's more of a policy decision. If the people prefer to have it mandatory, well, that's possible. But I do think voluntary accommodates a wider set of perspectives.
Yeah.
I will say this though. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning that Estonia adopted Finland's ID card, accepting that they're very different cultures, but Estonia had much greater success with their ID in a shorter period than Finland had. And the biggest difference between the two was Finland's was voluntary, Estonia's was mandatory. But this isn't something that we should necessarily take just because another country has done it that way.
There's also a chicken and egg component to this, where we're driving uptake of the card, at least for the digital side of the services, from an efficiency perspective. So government needs to be transforming its services to consume the digital ID and how we will do business in the new card, and that puts pressure on us, and that's good pressure. There's supposedly a magical number out there where the ID will start to snowball within society, and that's between 10% to 15% uptake. So this is coming from India, where they've rolled out, if I'm not mistaken, close to 1 billion cards, if I'm not mistaken. And there, again, it's efficiency that's driving it, and they hit somewhere around 12 to 13%. It started to snowball because people start to understand the benefit.
Yeah, when you think about the population size there, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So this person goes on, once again, we're taking a passive approach. It could be a useful tool, but because of persons being held accountable and lack of enforcement, the innocent will suffer for the guilty. So that's their opinion. Speaking of costs, they would like to know, what is the cost to implement the national ID? Why not make it exclusive of everything necessary to actually be useful? From a law enforcement point of view, it should be mandatory in an offense and an offense, I think, if someone is not in possession of one. So wow, they really want it to be mandatory. If it has all these benefits, then why not make it mandatory? They keep asking the same question. I can't understand the concept of leaving it up to people to do the right thing. I always say, if you're going to do something, do it once and do it right. Making something so useful, but leaving it up to persons to decide if they want to do it or not is a waste of time. A national ID card suggests it's something required by the government, but it's not. It's only if you want to. They go on. If it is not going to be mandatory, then biometric fingerprinting for all work permit holders and visitors. But the AFIS would be another costly investment that will probably not be done. So obviously that person is pro making it mandatory. I suppose that will probably be a political decision and not really one for you guys to make in any event. But I understand the logic on both ends of not making it mandatory and the logic of making it mandatory. So Cameron has a point here about the lost fingerprinting initiative. Someone else at one point mentioned, Cameron again, failed cameras, failed fingerprinting, failed ... So you are going up a little bit of sort of a public barrier here, fellas, in the sense that we've had other great ideas. We spent millions of dollars on fingerprinting equipment and so on that never came to fruition. Of course, now that you've gotten this far, you've actually got prototypes of the cards, you've used them, you've got a launch date. There is an expectation by the public that we're going to hold you accountable if this doesn't get launched. Are you feeling any pressure?
No pressure with this from the go. So we definitely know that there's expectations. We have to obviously balance those expectations that persons will not see these services immediately. And that's the whole purpose of the bill. There's going to be a whole nother wave of public consultation and marketing and education on go-to-market once the bills are passed. In that 6-month period that Ian had already mentioned, July, where it'll take us 6 months to basically get the register set up and then get the cards rolling out. And they will take some time for government services to be built to consume cards and to interact in these new ways. And we'll have to do those service by service. So actually, just as a plug, please visit our webpage, imagine.egov.ky, imagine.egov.ky, and leave your comments there. On the bills, we also want feedback on what the public wants as the first services that are the best services for them, that would benefit from digitization and benefit from use of card or use of just the register generally. So this is really an interactive period where we want to hear from the public to hear their views on what is the biggest impacts for them and how this could change their lives and how the government provides services for them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Alejandro says, yep, it took me a little over a month to get acknowledged as a Caymanian at WRC for this same reason. Part of the conversation earlier. What happens if you lose a card or it's stolen, says Carmen, sorry.
Okay, so you will have the ability to have the certificates suspended initially and or revoked and canceled. Once they're canceled, that's permanently canceled. And then you can have a card reissued. Again, it's because we're personalizing and issuing the cards locally, then that can happen as fast as or faster than a registration could happen, because you're getting a new one to replace one that you had previously.
Mm-hmm. All right, good, good. Dr. Victor Lukwa is in the house. Will the banks be required to accept that card alone as proof of ID? So this is an excellent question.
So this is one of the areas that we will be working and corresponding with SEMA on a bit more. Obviously, because this is a government issued ID and it has the digital verifiable areas that you can state that I am me. That this is a paradigm shift compared to what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
The burden of proof, though, it is always up to the private entity to establish their policy on what they will accept as a proof of identity. But we would like to work with SEMA to see what can be changed, to see what can be made more efficient now that we have the new paradigm of digitally verifying that you are you.
And we are engaging the banks,
Yes.
the retail banks as well, to look at, to consider, how this along these lines could be done. Because definitely it ultimately, as I described earlier, it's in the hands of the relying party. So the banks have to decide, as long as it's at least compliant with the regulations, how far to make sure that they are safe. But definitely, I would say thus far, both SEMA and the banks we've had discussions with so far, it seems the discussions are positive.
And I can also build on that by saying that there's a concept of assurance built into the bill, that we would be exploring KYC and your ability to satisfy some of the KYC, if not all of KYC. Right now, individuals are having to take utility bills to banks, to insurance providers, to prove that they are living where they say they are. That similar service could be done to the registrar, and there could be a period over which that that address is verified as the person's address, and that could then be used to satisfy some of these KYC requirements. In a more state, yes, we reduce the paper, we remove the paper out of that workflow, and that could be a query that you, the citizen, give us permission to do, and we could do that much more efficiently as a direct query.
Right. All right. Breaking news alert. I feel like I need some music whenever I say that. We've just received word that there has been an armed robbery, another one in Georgetown, this time right on Mary Street at 9:01 a.m. They're getting bold now, folks. Broad daylight, armed robbery. No injuries reported, thankfully. The police are at the scene at Latin Taste on Mary Street. So again, you're hearing it first here on CMR because we get it to you first. News breaking just now that after 9 o'clock this morning, there was an armed robbery at Latin Taste restaurant on Mary Street. So we happen to have the contact for the manager at Latin Taste. So we're going to message him and just make sure that everybody's okay. But these armed robberies are persisting, folks. And we have an expectation that something's going to be done about it. What a mess. All right. Next question, expiration date. That's been covered. So the IDs are good for 5 years.
Yes.
Okay. Flashpoint wants to know, is any of this information, any of this ID information accessible over the internet? Well, that's the whole point, right?
The register, your view of the register will be, you'll be able to view it via the internet. You'll be able to share via the QR code via the internet, but yes.
But it's all securely done, so you'd have to verify that you are you before you get access to your information.
Right. Very good. All right. Damien says, any medical history, diabetic, heart issues, etc., for EMT maybe?
Okay, so this is a key concept. I think one of the things that we fail to say often is what's not included. So things like the biometrics, as we talked about, medical, financial, all that information is not included in the register nor on the card. However, if there is a register, if the hospital has your ID code included in your record in their their facility, then EMTs could easily link you could figure out, okay, that this person is diabetic. But the key is that the information stays where it should be. It isn't brought back into one central place for everybody. We're trying to really keep the data set minimal and something and common or frequently needed that would be beneficial to the person.
Similarly, pharmacies and collecting your prescription at multiple pharmacies, that could be something also that in a mature state could be done, that you could get refills at any pharmacy because you would give the pharmacist access to get access to your medical record or that particular element that you need to get the pharmaceuticals for, and you could have that issued.
But the only thing that's connecting the dots there for you is you being able to be reliably identified as the right person by forward, but none of that information comes to the center. I'd encourage anyone that's interested. There's a couple of videos available on the internet about Estonia's e-health solution approach. You'll find it very interesting.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of this really just comes down to between now and the rollout of the cards, you guys are going to have to do a lot of public education campaigns because I think people are obviously very, very interested. I'm getting a lot of messages on WhatsApp where individuals are saying, make it mandatory. They're all for making it mandatory. One person says it needs to be mandatory, treated just like a Social Security in the US. And I'm excited about it. So you got people excited to get their cards. That's wonderful.
A very polarizing perspective.
Yes. I think you're either for it or you're not. There's probably no in between.
I'm glad that's a political decision.
But just to ensure that the public understands that everybody that is in the Cayman Islands will have an ID code. That is happening. That's the role of the register. The card is the optional piece.
Right. Got it. Another person says some of those who want to physically add biometrics to the card do not understand how a relationship database works. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
That's basically what we're talking about. Instead of centralizing everything, keep items decentralized, but then have it relationally tied to that unique ID code.
But only accessible by the parties that should have.
Correct.
Somebody else says it should be mandatory, at least for work permit holders. So I guess if the politicians are listening this morning, they can certainly take those elements on board. I saw another comment that came in where someone said that they have it in their country. Yes, they said we have an ID card from my home country, and we from the day that we're born, our parents register us, and it says that having the blood type is probably a good idea. All right, we've got a caller on the line. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the program.
Morning, Sandy. Morning to the gentleman. Just, I think the ID code, the ID, national ID, is well overdue, and it should be mandatory for everyone. A few years back, I had a conversation with deputy of police, and that was one of the things that him and I was talking about as far as having a national ID, and that's including everybody that's on a work permit, and even people who owns property here that comes to live for 3 to 4 or 6 months out of the year. They all should have one. That way, and then it's also be mandatory to carry it around because you lived in the States. I worked and lived in the States for on and off, and it's mandatory to have an ID on you at all times. Because if not, and the police ask you for an ID of just a simple question because you're trying to understand who you are and where because of whatever reason, and you don't have an ID, they can hold you for up to 48 hours until you prove that you're who you are. And I don't see why we're going to be toying around, they leave it up to the general public to have an ID. But the other thing is one of the reasons why I wanted to call in about is that I think the children at their school, at the high school age, it should have been when they first joined the high school, that's something that should be issued to them so they get used to having an ID with them throughout the rest of their life, And it's not no stranger when they got to wait till they turn 17. They got to try to get some sort of ID. They already have an ID what happens is a child got in an incident, they can't speak, but nobody knows who he is. But if he's got his wallet on him or her, they got an ID that they can say, okay, well, the police then can contact the parents through the QR code or that's being registered. But I think we still should make it mandatory and not just sit there and say, okay, well, you come and get it if you want it. You know? But I think also with the voter registration system, that already saying who is Caymanian, because if you're not Caymanian, you can't vote. So that should be tied into the card, stating whether it's a red V or something on there saying that, yes, you're eligible to vote. So when you go to voter registration, when you go to the voters for election, they can see and then they can pull up whatever they need to pull up. You know? But I also think that they should try to figure out a way, or should include some sort of biometric with like a fingerprint. You know? Because for the simple fact of having it, I have to go to the police department to get my fingerprints to send to the FBI's in the States, because I'm trying to do a course and they're trying to verify who I am if they don't already have it. You know, it's the first time registry. So it should be something that you should be able to have, that you can access, that's already been certified, that you can either pull it off of your system and email it straight to them or whoever it is, whatever thing that's asking, requiring it. Because like even like the FCC in the United States, they're asking, all those people there, they're going to be fingerprinted as well. So I don't see why we shouldn't have it on our system, because SEMA can also require that for their board of directors, that for different trust companies and so forth. But that's my little 2 cents to it. But I think we should really look at getting the school children at the age of high school, you know, not only just government, all across the board, get them in play first. Mr. Tibbetts, I'm something you might want to look into. And then that way also, when they go to school, they can just tap in to show that they're actually at school and it's registering, if however you want to use it. But not saying that that's what you should do, but if they have that form of ID on them. Because we're 40 years behind Singapore. You know, I remember being there in the 90s, and you go rent a car, and what you do, the guy you take thumb fingerprints, and they give you a key. You go, even when you touch the door opens up without even using the key. So, and then you could even use your phone to go up to a soda machine and to get a soda.
Wow.
Like scanning the code, punching it in, because your phone already has funds on it.
Yes.
But this card has a lot of more potential opportunities to it. I know they're still rolling it out and trying to just do the basic first. But I still think that, you know, adding the fingerprint is a must.
Thank you so much, caller.
Yeah. And
all right.
Anyway, I'll let you guys go. Thank you.
Okay, dear.
Ian,
Thanks.
keep it up. A good job, guys.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, so lots of people. We had another caller. Feel free to call us back. 936 Bobo is the telephone number. Lots of people are saying they want it to have some biometric element to it. And that was a good point that he made, is make sure you put on your sort of PR drive that you go into schools, you meet with kids, you explain to them, you know, what the national ID card is, how it's going to benefit them now and in the future. And, you know, they will encourage their parents to, hey, I want to be in the cool club. I want to get my national ID. Maria says, how is information going to be protected?
Okay. So from a security perspective, it has to be quite encompassing. And think of it as this information as the core of an onion, and there are many layers around it. We have to protect the information with different technologies, with processes, from an integrity perspective, making sure you heard us talk about that we could do online enrollment, but it has to be eyeballed. Then we talked about interoperability. For the interoperability solution, we're using a solution that was developed in Estonia. It's open source. It is supported by a community, not just Estonia. And
it is of the highest standard.
Yeah, it was designed specifically for protecting information exchange between systems. And the data at rest is encrypted, the data in motion is encrypted, the data, we've really locked down the methods of, or the ways that the data can be accessed. So, you know, if you think of it this way, if you've got a house with 100 windows, well, you've got to protect everything, right? If you've got a house with one door, you've got to, you know what you've got to focus on to protect. So we're, from that concept, we've tried to lock down really how we access the data, where the data is provided to you online, etc. It will use security protocols as normal, and then the card has various physical and digital security elements in it. I'm confident in saying that it has the most security features of any of the local cards.
Yes.
Passports probably is the only thing that would be
Similar in
comparable or potentially, you know, more so.
So the UN ran an evaluation. The Auditor General's report that they recently did a report on e-services, and they flagged in that report the UN's work. In the UN's work, they did analysis of a lot of leading countries regarding e-services, and Estonia comes up as the gold standard. So just in case anybody's wondering why we're choosing to use and implement this service, it is the gold standard and has been for quite some time. All of the work, the register, and the system will be penetration tested, will be audited, and will have regular audits so that you can be assured that everything that is being built is tested both in the building stages and continually after building.
Yeah. And I think something else I should just quickly mention in terms of Estonia is that one of the things that drew us to Estonia was also it's probably one of the most relatable population sizes, because you know we talked about India, we talked about a billion ID code, we talked about Singapore, we talked, you know, all of these are in millions up to the billion kind of mark, whereas Estonia is in the over 1 million category. So that's part of why we also looked to them.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We do have a caller in the line. Good morning, caller, and welcome to the program.
Yes, good morning to everyone. I just have two comments. First comment is, I guess the debate here is convenience versus privacy is the issue that a lot of people, you know, have concerns with. You're getting more convenience, but at the expense of your privacy. Second comment, I assume this system works when there's electricity. What happens after if it's mandatory and you have a disaster as we often do, hurricane? What happens? Is it usable when there's no electricity?
Well, if your phone still works, I guess that might depend on what you're using it for, right? But if you still have access to your phone and there are things that you can do with your phone, then yes. You know, if you don't have any electricity, but you have the physical card, the scanner and the chip features might not necessarily be working. But if you walk around the physical card, people can still have a look at the physical card and compare like the picture to you. And so nothing is 100%. If you have a major disaster, that's probably going to be the least of your worries. But you know.
Oh yeah, fair enough. But if you make it mandatory, then people won't be able to execute certain. You know, I remember after Hurricane Ida, we had to put in place manual processes so for people to do simple government transactions. Now, if you make something mandatory, you eliminate that ability. So there's always a need for a manual backup process. So I think the idea is great, but you can't put all your eggs in that.
But isn't that where the world is going right now? So, you know, I think about, for example, you know, we're watching very, very closely about what's happening in the so-called metaverse, right? Facebook has laid off 17,000 people this morning. Twitter has done 13,000 or whatever number they did the other day. I think theirs was a bit less actually. But Facebook goes down for 2 hours. Instagram goes down for 2 hours. They're all owned by WhatsApp, same company. How are you communicating? Well, I suppose you can still call people the old-fashioned way, but most people are sitting there going, "Oh, I'm wondering why my messages weren't going through." You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
we have sort of adapted to a large extent to this digital world already. And let me be honest: if there's no internet, or if the internet goes down, how am I going to get news to you? How am I going to communicate with you? So I
Through the
rely.
mall road.
Well, the old-fashioned mall road is ran by the information superhighway. So in order for me to sit in Savannah and Lower Valley and tell you that there's a robbery all the way in Georgetown, how do you think I know that information? I'm not standing outside of Latin Taste right now. So this interconnectivity and relationships that we have with technology and people, I hate to tell you, but I think it's only gonna get more and more that way. And we just have to hope that the infrastructure is solid enough. The storm of the century, you have one of those once every 100 years. You have to have a contingency plan for that. Yes, but that's not something that's going to happen every year, if you know what I mean.
Well, fair enough, but there's the risk that it has to be managed.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
we have to have those infrastructure. I mean, the government project to put in fiber optic is key. So these type of initiatives, we have to have that infrastructure in place.
Absolutely.
Because it's great to have a car, but if you don't have someone to fix it and no gasoline, you're gonna have a problem, right?
Yep.
That's my comment.
Thank you so much, caller. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. So it's a little bit of a question of other build outs around a national ID. Systems will fail. There might be issues on occasion with, we've heard in the past, like planning department website isn't working or whatever, and you can't do online applications. But these agencies and departments and even private organizations, I remember when CNB was rolling out their new online platform, there were some growing pains, and there were some businesses who were not able to access the new platform. So they had to keep them on the old one a little bit longer until they were able to, for whatever glitches exist. I mean, I think I just discovered a glitch this week that they're trying to figure out why a certain thing is happening with a particular account. It doesn't happen with any of my other accounts, but these things happen, and you throw it back at the technical team. And sometimes they have to go back to the drawing board and kind of figure out a little bit of what's going on. But that, I don't think that that's a reason not to have the technology and not to push forward with these technological advances.
And I think the thing that we should really not underrate is the simple ability to have the card in its physical form as a ID. After and God forbid we have another IBAN, or any country does, but after IBAN, if you had a physical ID document, it's still you could still do things as a result of that, and if you need to travel internationally, we were able to move 5,000 people out of here within days, I think it was, after IBAN. And in some cases, their travel documents were damaged. However, the receiving countries, the one thing was they must have an ID. They must have a form of ID. And so again, and Sandra, you hit the nail on the head. If your mobile device is working, and as long as we have internet connectivity internationally, then you can do a lot of the digital features as well. And some of the digital features you can even do immediately on hand, because the reading of the optical of the machine readable zone and the using that to get access of the information that is on the face of the card, again, that doesn't need any of those connectivities.
Also would love to add that we have to plan for the exceptions, like the caller was saying, the hurricane that is coming. But if we build systems for the exceptions, we won't get very far. That's the status quo. And if we are 95% of the time hyper efficient, then when we do have to go back to that manual process, it is bearable because you understand that this is the exception. And the vulnerabilities that were being described are still the vulnerabilities that exist today. If we can't print today because of a hurricane, there's the same problem because the output of a piece of paper is typically where the service is. We give you the paper where the government service has as an input. And still need that exception service right now if the power was to go out. So that hasn't changed. We need.
This comment from Cameron making everybody chuckle. Cameron says, I'm coming to pick mine up on Friday morning. We do have a caller on the line. Charles, just take a minute to hold that thought. Caller, good morning and welcome to the program.
Tell opinionated Cameron that Charlene say I am calling it for my reservation, and you know I've been online, so I'm still before him. The gentleman knows nothing about technology, but my name is Charlene Peart. Hold my space. I come in by tomorrow morning with my documents in paper and everything. Put Cameron behind me. It'll be number 2. Charlene Peart. Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. Opinionated Cameron.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
And Soca over there in that country.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So this is fantastic. People are excited. Good question. Marshall says, what about Caymanians living overseas?
Yes.
That's also where the online enrollment will come in handy.
Yes.
Because they are entitled to apply for the card.
And just again, another plug. Please give us your feedback. We're so excited that you are happy to and want to see this moving forward. Visit imagine.egov.ky. Leave your comments there and tell us about why you believe why it's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important I think it's important that we get the positives and the concerns,
yes.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mariah says, since the card isn't rolling out until next year, fingerprinting should be incorporated, and record keeping of newborn footprints and handprints should somehow be added to the children's ID. Oh, Lord. Mariah is all about the biometrics. She's like, give us the DNA sample. Give it to us all.
I like that we haven't touched delegated authority, but delegated authority is a concept that as a parent, you will have access to your children's information just because you're a parent up until 18, and at 18 that right will fall away. But there are vulnerable in our society that need care and need guardians. Those delegated measures that exist now, power of attorney, court orders, etc., those will continue to persist and be recognized as delegated authority.
Natasha is for mandatory cards as well. She says, noting the fiasco when many can't sign up for assistance because they have no valid ID. Good morning to Miss Ravina. Tamian was talking about the billion population. Nope, that's a different country. Let me just see. El Rey says, will my ID card give me a discount on my CUC bill? No, El Rey, I have to ask El Rey a question. I'm going to have to ask him this off air, but he got a little bee in his bonnet with him and CUC. I want to know what happened to the two of them. They must have had some kind of falling out, man. Oh my goodness. All right, lots of questions.
But it's an interesting one because companies could latch on to the ID card for their own purposes, like discounts or whatever. I mean, probably the most common example would be a case where if you're going, the tourism tax, if you go to a hotel locally, if you can prove that you're Caymanian or US, then you don't have to pay that tourism tax, I believe is the scenario. And it can do that.
And we also really haven't talked about the ability for third parties to build other things that benefit from the ID. So the government is issuing you a verifiable ID, but there could be other services. So the gentleman earlier talked about students, and it could be bus cards, it could be school lunches that they're apps that are recognized where a parent could pay for whatever the child has accumulated if they're using their ID to validate as themselves. But that is layers that the private sector now can take and build, payment by phone. Those are all private sector initiatives that they can leverage once this is issued to individuals.
So Cameron says, we've been talking about it for a while. Public education is very, very important in everything that we do that has national implications and concerns. So that's why they're here this morning, folks. Janetta says, or it can be mandatory as of the age of 18 so that you're capable of opening a bank account, getting a job, transportation. So she's already seeing the expansion of this in her mind's eye.
Well, and I think that, we say, and we think of 18 naturally, but we also recognize that kids in high school, tend to start getting involved in internships and summer jobs and various other things. So the reality is the benefits can start even earlier than that.
Yes. Cameron says facts. Anna don't see who most of the people Anna see every day. Oh, sorry. Anna don't know who most of the people Anna see every day. Mandatory. Anna like mandates, eh?
I mean,
Cameron is so funny. Cameron said,
go ahead.
We're going to soon get Sandy to call the FBI and the Pentagon on our behalf. So lots of people, Ms. Ravina is all in favor of having the fingerprint elements. It's really interesting to see. I don't know who your focus groups were, but a large degree of our callers on the program are saying, number one, make it mandatory. Number two, include some of the biometric elements.
It was actually for us that more of the elderly side of the population had no problem with fingerprints. They're like, listen, I haven't done anything wrong. You need to verifiably know that I didn't do that.
Yes.
And that was the sentiment.
So Damien says, Dr. Google in the house, the Estonian Police and Border Guard Board has announced that biometrics will be applied to the Estonian Citizens Card and EU Citizens Card starting from 2021. So I guess they've done that already, which means that the design of the card ID will change. Fingerprints will be collected and biometrics will be applied to the chip. Very interesting.
I mean, there's technology out there that you can even get what they call biometric on chip verification. I mean, these things obviously have a cost, but they have benefits. And I think it really comes down to what our society is ready for, what our society can benefit and take advantage of. And we can evolve with the times, but I think we also have to recognize that there's a balance to be had between those of us that would maybe on the more extreme edge of how far we want to go with it, and those that are on the most conservative edge, and what's the majority there in the middle. And
what we have to realize is that Estonia is having the debate of let's not even include a person's face on an ID card. That's the level of maturity that they don't need the person's face, because there's so many digital services everywhere you go. You just plug your card in and they're consuming that number. They remember their ID code number just by heart, that nobody needs face recognition at all.
I mean, I've been to Estonia a couple of times now, and I tell you, it's impressive, everything from their education system through and how they've integrated the technology in general. But I also recognize it's a very different culture, different, and different background. I think the thing that I liked probably most of all, though, was technology was enabling life. It didn't feel intrusive on you. And something that really stood out to me was, I remember we were at a conference, e-governance conference in Estonia, and their prime minister from whatever spoke, and she was, we were really impressed. She was knowledgeable. She was on the subject and so forth. Afterwards, talking to some folks, and they were saying, well, they weren't, some of the Estonians, they weren't very impressed at all. And we said, well, why? I said, why is she talking about technology? This isn't about technology. This is about how I get another half an hour to spend with my kids because of the efficiency that I've given me back. And it's
an enabler.
I said, okay, I can appreciate where you guys are, but you're 20, 25 years into this. We're not.
Yes.
We're junior to you, and so for us, it is still about getting past the points that you went through probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, the infancy stage. So Cameron wants to know if other BOTs have this system, or I guess national IDs. Anything about what the other British overseas territories are doing? And let's be honest, most of them are just as behind as us. So I don't know if they're the
I don't know
to look at
the BOTC that is as advanced as us. Barbados has just introduced their digital ID. They've had a national ID for quite a while, and they've just introduced the digital component of that. And Jamaica is, my understanding, in the works of doing something. But we are the most advanced that I understand within our region.
I think one of the things that really helped us that challenges some of the other places is actually having data protection law in place. And I know we're not fully as a country really appreciating of it yet, but that's a big deal actually.
All right. El Rey says you can't let what if situations determine whether or not you do something. Good point. Cameron says the old fashioned mile road still works. Yeah, but we need phones. As a matter of fact, I'm going to send the videographer right now to get a picture and some video footage for the evening news. That's how the world works, folks. Miss Alma says the national ID should be mandatory for all Caymanians. We are one of the few places that doesn't have a national ID.
That's correct.
What a mess. Jonathan, he says, I kind of like the idea. What? Of the ID, it should be able to specify who are the indigenous Caymanians from the paper Caymanians. Oh, Lord. Jonathan, look at Pandora's box you gone and opened this morning. And I think it should allow some kind of benefits for the indigenous Caymanians, something like free healthcare or UBI or something for the original Caymanians. What a mess. Damien says national airlines from those countries come to pick up their own nationalities. And Ivan, they did? Estonia sent a plane here? I don't remember that. That's news to me, Damien. Live says, leave it up to the professional. No need to make it mandatory right now. They have their reasons. Well, the politicians really are the ones who will make that decision. So Aliano says, my thing is, if the ID is connected to a database, it will tell you who you are, what you do as work. It should contain working, employment, pension, and healthcare information.
So let again, the concept of that relation between what's in the register and on the card, and then where other information can be. But pension and healthcare is really, or health insurance, are two interesting things. Today, the Caymans, everyone is supposed to have those two items, basically, all adults working, etc. And however, it's incredibly difficult under today's processes for the government to ensure that everybody does have health insurance, for example, because you have insurance with company A, and while you're working for company A, they have insurance with this company. You leave, and then you show up over here with this other employer, with this other insurance company, and how does the health regulatory or health insurance commission try to ensure that you're not in a situation where you're not availing or don't have health insurance available to you? Whereas if we start with pensions, for example, you have if your names are transposed or any other fact, it can be very difficult to connect the dots between and to ensure that persons get access to the benefits and so forth. So there are many different things that we can benefit as people from having the ID and the ID code that is persistent with us. Think about persons that might have had a pension or in their maiden name, gotten married using a new name, but there's not an obligation to register that name
and to update
or to, in in the general registry. However, with the identity register, you would be able to update that and have that reflected so officially, and it's linked back to the same ID code. So there's persistence with your identity over time.
Wow. Looks like you guys might have to come back another day because I really need to get to this Miss Cayman issue. We have someone just said, listen, I got a flight to catch. So I'm going to talk about Miss Cayman. All right, Cameron, we'll do a few more comments and then wrap things up. Cameron says at this stage, our vulnerability outweighs any exceptions. Damien is saying a survey should have been done before this was rolled out. Well, they did focus groups, but of course, I keep telling government, y'all don't want to believe me, guys, that the biggest focus group in the world are listeners right here on this show, because you get people from all walks of life tuned into the program. Tracy's puzzled. She said, how can someone not have a valid ID? You're now, that's another question for another day about what are we? Are we British or BOTC? We're actually BOTC. Juanita says, what is required for the ID card? And what if you have a disability or a disabled adult and can't read or write? What will be the outcome for that disability person? It sounds good to me. So she's on board. Just some sort of finer questions about if someone has a disability, they can't read or write, how will you go about?
It'd be possible for them to have the idea. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Jerry wants to know if this will make other government IDs invalid, those that have already been verified, like passports and voters ID. No, it wouldn't invalidate an ID.
No.
All right. So Moya says it expires and they're not financially able to apply for a new one. Remember that there are many people living in the Cayman Islands in poverty and live hand to mouth. So this is about other forms of ID that cost money, because I think most passport costs money. I guess the only one that doesn't is your voter's ID. But passports and driver's licenses cost money. Denny, that's probably going to take more time. Maybe we'll save that for a part 2 of this program. Miss Hornsby is here. She says, good morning, Massive. Hello. All right, gentlemen, I would love to keep you on longer, but you've been on for a while already. And like I said, we got to dissect some stuff that has been happening with Miss Cayman. So she's going to kick you off with her high heels this morning of the program. Let's talk about a GPS feature. Ooh, y'all are thinking really hard this morning. Yeah, we love it. Listen, we're all on board for the National ID program. We appreciate you guys taking the time to come on the show today, go through some preliminary points. As you get closer to launch date, shall we have you on again just to refresh everyone's minds, let them know about the rollout protocols, where you're going to be, and all those types of details. Do a proper educational campaign on this, because I think ultimately that is required. Cameron says, I think Cameron's trying to be cheeky here. Tell Ian and Matt that they can take the rest of the day off. Very informative. Cameron thinks that you filled your quota for civil service work for the day. World class this morning.
And ID confusion. Oh, thank you so much, Sandra. This has been a great opportunity for us to talk to your listening viewers. Very interesting platform to do this, online and have their comments and be able to show slideshows. Thank you very much for facilitating this with your listeners. And we really have enjoyed the opportunity to come before you and share some key information on what we think is a transformational set of bills that will leverage the Cayman Islands into a new era and give the foundational possibilities for new things to happen, and achieve the digital, that we close the digital gaps, the persons that are most vulnerable among us that need those IDs, that they'll be able to have access to those IDs.
Wonderful. We really appreciate you. Ian, some final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for, it's been great. My problem is generally trying to keep it down to not talking too much about it, because obviously I've been immersed in this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think I really see the benefits to our people. But I think one of those benefits that we didn't get to talk about is how much time the digital signature capability can save you.
Yes.
We did a quick test in the office where with the traditional print, sign, scan, email approach versus just open, sign, email on the mobile app. And the difference, without any sort of delays, I'm trying to be quite efficient, with the board process was 86 seconds for one signature. If you do 3 signatures a day, in a work environment, 5 days a week, and if you did this, the difference would equate to over 2 working days a year in savings just doing that. So I mean, I think I'll leave with that.
Time savings. We're all looking for that. Jonathan, he's so funny. He says, put the information in the compass. And Damien says, talk about a waste of a paper. Y'all behave now. Everybody's perplexed, including me, why certain things are still happening over there. But anyway, we'll discuss that once our guests have left. Remember, there's certain things we don't talk about in front of guests. Y'all need to learn how to behave. Charles Brown, aka Matt Brown, on a good day. Thank you so much. Ian Tibbetts, e-government director. They've joined the program today. This is both of their first time on the Cold Hard Truth. You guys you behaved yourself for the most part. You were very good. You asked a lot of good logical questions, and we would definitely like to extend an invitation for them to come back on the program, because undoubtedly, as we start to think more about this and it sits with you a bit more, I think that there will be some questions that have come out of this. Now, listen, if you feel very, very passionate about the fact that this should be mandatory for everyone, talk to your MPs, talk to the PAC government. They're the ones who make that political decision. That's not a decision for essentially the administrators and the people who are the thinkers of how to roll it out. There are certain types of decisions that they really do not make. So their focus group was a little bit like, oh, we don't know. So they went off the focus group. But like I said, maybe the focus group wasn't really, I don't know where they got a focus group from, but maybe they're not, a true representation of the Caymanian population. So that's where now you've got your political remit that you can go back to. So thank you, gentlemen, so much. As you can see, we did invite on the program. And you know what? We try to have fun here. Even when we're talking about serious matters and we try to educate people, you can always inject just a little bit of fun and humor into your lives. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and
See you.
your listeners.
All righty. So that's a world-class civil service right there for you, folks. Lots of questions, lots of answers. Check out their website. They have put up quite a bit of information for you guys to get access to.